let's switch to another big issue for this country now and have a look at some strategic issues and foreign policy issues. I'm joined by Peter Jennings, as he often does join us, from the Australian Strategic Policy Institute. Great to talk to you, Peter. I really have only two questions for you today, but they're two big questions. And the first one I want to put to you, I think, is going to be, it's very important for the nation's foreign policy setting, but it's going to be very important for the country, the election, the looming federal election as well. And that is our national policy towards China. The government's been very strong in standing up to China. Labor, at least the current Labor opposition leader, and Penny Wong, the foreign policy spokesperson, say they basically agree with that stance towards China. Yet you've got former Prime Minister Paul Keating, former Foreign Minister Bob Carr, Labor luminaries, who are essentially running a completely different line, saying that we should be softer and we should look to placate Beijing. Do you think that Labor can hold the line, a strong line, the line it needs to hold, against China over the myriad of issues it seems to be intent on punishing us for?
Chris, I think it'll be necessary for Labor to do that both for political reasons, because they will be punished if they start to look weak on national security, but also for the actual strategic factor at play here, which is to say that if we start to look like we're offering concessions to China, I think this is only going to make Beijing more offensive in terms of how it will deal with Australia. So Keating, I think in particular, is going to be a headache for Labor, because he has a sort of iconic status inside the party. But, up until now, at least, everything that Labor has said has really been to demonstrate that they're bipartisan with the government on China-related matters. And my view is that if they are elected, Chris, that they'll end up discovering through intelligence briefings and other means that really there is very little scope for an Australian government to change what our government has done. This is not a story about trying to tweak to get the right diplomatic language correct. We are on a collision course with China because we have different strategic objectives. And I think any Australian government will be forced to ultimately defend our sovereignty and the way of life that we value in this country. So I suspect that Albanese will keep this issue as bipartisan as he can. I doubt very much that he'll be listening to Paul Keating's advice in particular on this. After an initial attempt to maybe hold out some sort of diplomatic approach towards China, what a Labor government, if elected, would discover is they've got very little scope to do anything different from what the current government has been doing.
Yeah, fascinating insight. That's such an important point. If they were to form government and get those briefings from the intelligence agencies, stuff starts to become very real to make a common phrase a little bit more palatable. The other issue I wanted to get your thoughts on, Peter, were the latest developments when it comes to Ukraine. The Russians are accusing Washington of creating hysteria. Well, it's Russia that's gathering all those troops in that part of the world. I would have thought the backlash, the response, is exactly what Vladimir Putin's been trying to trigger.
Yes, I mean, it's a sort of standard, almost Leninist style of obfuscation to sort of shift the blame elsewhere. But I can tell you, Chris, those 120,000 Russian troops are not on the Ukrainian border for a skiing holiday. Vladimir Putin is very clearly giving himself the option to move militarily into Ukraine should he choose to do so. What I think is interesting, Chris, is that we're now seeing Putin look like he's starting to delay. He's finding reasons to want to continue talking to the West. And I just wonder if that might indicate an emerging view inside Putin's mind that, wow, this could really be a pretty damaging issue for Russia if they move into Ukraine in a big way and then find that they're fighting a bloody insurgency, that, Kiev may fall quickly. But in fact, I think the Ukrainians are going to put up quite a tough fight and will continue to do so after a Russian occupation. So perhaps there's just a shred of doubt in Putin's mind. And then the other factor worth remembering, Chris, is that Friday this week, he'll be in Beijing for the opening of the Winter Olympics. I don't think we're going to see a Russian military move before that time, or maybe during the time of the Olympics. So there's a lot of forces being maintained, ready to go on a sort of coiled spring which is very expensive, and the Russian economy won't be able to sustain this for long. So there's a lot of serious dilemmas which I think are now impacting on Putin's calculations. Not that Biden or the West has actually done a pretty convincing job of deterring him. They haven't. It's been a bit of a shambles. But, you know, I would
it's
frankly
been a bit of
rather
a shambles and it's been a bit weak, but let's hope he's been given pause to think regardless. Thanks so much for joining us again, Peter.
Thanks, Chris. My pleasure.
Peter Jennings there from the Australian Strategic Policy Institute.